Hello, welcome to A Safe Place, a podcast where we discuss school gun violence and how to keep kids safe in schools. I am your host, Louis Aponte, the author of the upcoming books, A Safe Place, Imagining Schools Without Gun Violence, and the Ultimate U.S. School Shooting Reference Guide. Thank you for joining me. I'm honored to have you here with me today. Today is episode number 7, and I am very pleased to have with me a special guest, children's author and former Reserve Law Enforcement Officer, Claire Marie. Now, Claire has a very impressive background. Her work spans across school emergency preparedness and management, school safety and prevention systems, nonprofits, the private sector, and law enforcement mental health. Wow. Claire also has a Bachelor's of Science in Public Health from Oregon State University, and she has received the Culture of Writing Award in Public Health and graduated magna cum laude in 2012. Welcome, Claire. So thrilled to have you as my guest today.
Thank you so much for having me and for the kind words.
Absolutely, absolutely. So I understand you wrote a very unique children's book, and I was wondering if I can ask you a few questions as to how it came about, beginning with, could you explain the difference between, well, this one in particular is about lockdown drills. And so can you tell me the difference between lockdown drills and active shooter drills? Because that's something I don't know about.
Oh, yeah, and such a good question. So lockdown drills allows us to practice a key function that we all need to be able to do within school systems in order to help mitigate potential threat and restore safety when there may be something going on in the school. And so lockdown is locks, lights, out of sight. And we use it when there's something either directly on school grounds or something going on within the building. And when someone perceives, we use the term not normal, but what you want to think about is situational awareness. School staff know what day-to-day looks like, right? They know who's normally on campus. They know the vehicles parked nearby. They know whether or not people should be walking on the playground or not. And when they see something that goes from average everyday stuff to not average everyday stuff, then lockdown is just one of those functions that they can use in order to manage the classroom and keep kids safe and keep themselves safe while helpers come and figure out what might be going on.
Okay.
An active shooter drill is a specific scenario-based, threat-based practice. So we could use the function of lockdown, not just because there might be an active shooter on campus. I mean, that is the worst case scenario, right?
Right.
I've had schools use a lockdown because a teacher saw someone hop the fence and they were like, that's weird and concerning. So they was going to lockdown, which was appropriate. Helpers, law enforcement went and made contact with that person. It was a local construction worker who needed to use a porta potty, right? And so, yep, I kid you not. Wow. So it's where that wasn't every average everyday stuff. And they were like, oh my gosh, we got to make sure we manage the situation. They did it appropriately, and everything was fine. Okay. And so, active shooter is specific to. There is an active threat on campus, specifically someone with a gun. And so it's super important that we allow law enforcement to practice active shooter drills on campus when students are not present and it's clearly communicated to the community that it's a drill occurring.
Right.
And staff should be invited to participate, but not required to participate in active shooter drills. So hopefully that helps answer your question.
Yes, no, it's one's very specific and the other one's just like a precaution in general. Now, when it is a situation where they notice something unusual, it's not necessarily a shooting kind of drill and they hop the fence and they just need to use a porta potty. Is there any negative impact on the teachers? Like, hey, what were you thinking? It was just a construction guy. I mean, I figure it's better safe than sorry, right?
Yeah, exactly. There shouldn't be. I haven't encountered a school where there would be a negative impact on a teacher. That doesn't mean it doesn't exist, right? But most schools, what they want is staff to do whatever is necessary appropriately to keep students and themselves safe. And so, in fact, one of the things when we go into schools and we talk with teachers, we ask them, do you know how you would call a lockdown drill from your classroom or from the recess grounds? Because we got to know, do they know how to do that process? And sometimes they do, and sometimes they don't.
Right. Well, that brings me to my next question as to, why is it important for students and staff to practice lockdown drills, especially when you have so many substitute teachers, for example. So why is that important?
Yeah. Everyone should practice lockdown drills, should know this, should be trained in the steps. We call it coaching when we're with the kids, and should be trained in the steps on how to do that because we want to build that muscle memory. Right. We know that when our brains encounter a perceived threat or experience stress, a stress activation, that it's not functioning in the same way as when we're in a calm environment. We're at our kind of normal homeostasis level.
Right. Right. So you want
So
to
we need to
feel that,
train
that
that brain.
automatic.
And
Okay.
it's also super important that the kids know, one of the biggest things I encounter is the kids, they want to help and they don't want to feel helpless. And
Right.
so teaching them steps they can take to keep themselves safe actually a lot of times helps alleviate some anxiety that they might have.
And that makes perfect sense. Keep practicing so it becomes muscle memory, and then do it while they're relaxed. So that way they're not surprised and they're in panic mode and they don't know what to do. When we talk about lockdown drills and getting them prepared, in your experience, would you say that lockdown drills and especially active shooter drills have like an emotional or psychological impact on students? And if so, what?
Yeah, well, I mean, you should never do active shooter drills with students. There's no benefit. Students should not be exposed at any age to an active shooter drill.
Really?
Because, oh yeah, no, because that implies, right, we don't gain anything. They don't gain anything by being exposed to this potential threat, even if it's a fake scenario, even if they're told,
Right.
right? What we want them to be good at is lockdown. We don't need to expose them to a pretend active shooter to help them be good at lockdown, right?
Okay.
It's
Okay.
3 simple steps. So again, law enforcement should absolutely be allowed and invited to do active shooter drills on school campuses, but not when students are present, and they should not require staff to participate, but they can allow and invite staff to participate.
I'm so glad you mentioned that because my best friend, I remember his daughter in high school. She was invited to be an actor to in those kinds of active shooter situations where she was covered in blood and stuff. And I'm thinking to myself, is that a good idea? Like what are we teaching them, and like how is that impacting them psychologically? So
Yeah. So if we teach lockdown drills in an appropriate trauma informed way, well, if we teach any emergency function, right? So lockdown is a function, shelter in place is a function. Where I live in Oregon, the most common one, at least away from the coast, is going to be drop, cover, and hold in event of an earthquake.
I see.
Yeah. So we want to teach any of these key emergency response protocols in trauma informed ways. If we don't, then we do run the risk of not achieving our goal in a way that doesn't stress activate the kids, right? We don't have to stress activate people to help them be good at 3 simple steps.
Mhm.
Like, I'm going to assume you remember that if you ever catch on fire, you stop, drop, and roll, right?
Right.
And you're
Right.
not around, I don't know, age 3, 4, 5.
Yes.
And however old, right? We're adults now. Still remember, if I ever catch on fire, drop, cover, and hold. And in fact, I thought that was a lot more common when they taught me that when I was little. Like, I
Mhm.
was going
Mhm.
to use this. I've never used it,
Right.
thankfully.
Right. Thankfully.
Um, we don't catch people on fire to teach them drop, cover, and hold, right?
Right.
And I still remember,
Yeah, that's a good point. That's a
I
good point.
still remember how to do it, you
Yes.
know? And also, the actual concept of being on fire is horrifying.
Yeah.
We teach kids that the key steps without terrifying them. So I'm always just going to go back to, like, we don't have to terrify people to teach them how to keep themselves safe.
That's a fair point. That's a fair point. So tell me about these books, Sammy and Friends. How were they created? How did they come about?
Yeah. So honestly, it just kind of wrote itself out of a need to have a better tool to interact with kids, because I was going into schools, and kids, not all kids, but some kids would become stress activated when they did specifically lockdown drills. Lots of kids enjoy drop, cover, and hold earthquake because you get to hide under your desk and grab on, and I don't know, it's kind of fun for them. Some are afraid, especially if they've experienced an earthquake.
Hmm.
Um, and so for me, for my work, I had to go in and support schools in doing lockdown drills. And, kids would cry. And that kind of broke my heart a little bit. And so I wanted a tool where I felt that I could better interact with kids
Hmm.
uh, and teach them how to do lockdown drills and not scare them. And my work for so long has been in how do we do trauma-informed practices in different systems, that I just started writing the story. Kids, when you can externalize what the kids are facing, make it not about them. First off, it makes it a little bit safer to engage with, right? Like, I can
Hmm.
think about this fun character
Right.
has
Right.
this magical world,
Hmm.
and it walks them through this world, and it helps introduce them and realize this concept that they, just like Sammy, practice being safe every day, all day long, in lots of different ways. And sometimes we have to practice new ways to be safe. And so we're able to introduce this concept of lockdown as just one of those other things that you practice doing every day to keep yourself safe,
Right.
as opposed to this like really big, scary thing.
Right.
Uh, and so I needed it as a tool. And we built in, we have activity sheets, like we have coloring sheets. You can color Sammy,
Oh,
and so,
nice.
yeah, so we build in little kind of outlets for the kids in case they do feel a little bit stressed, which
Mhm.
um, we don't have the time to get into trauma informed practices now, but not all stress is bad.
Right.
And we have to expose kids and adults to healthy levels of stress in order to help their systems develop resilience skills. And so
Mhm.
it's okay if they're a little stress activated. We also then need to give them tools and outlets for how to process that out. And I also wanted to build more choice into the process. So traditionally, the way, I can't speak for every school, but many of the schools that I work with, traditionally the way they teach lockdown, there's not choice built into it.
Oh.
And the first time they hear it, it's over this intercom and it's really
Mhm.
loud, and they're like, is it really a drill, or are you trying to trick me? Kids
Right.
will actually think that. And so, we wanted to have this kind of stepwise approach where here's this fun story. You're going
Mhm.
to,
Mhm.
week later, we're going to come visit you, and then we're going to talk, we're going to hang out. We bring, actually, you might be able to see, oh, other way, Sammy doll right up there. So she actually, that's a little
Oh,
Sammy.
oh, yeah, yeah, I see him now. Yes.
So she goes into the classroom with us.
Nice.
We talk about how she's magical, and,
Mhm.
I carry her, and that's her special form she takes when she comes into the human world. And
Right.
so there's a lot of parallels between Crittertopia, the critter elders who have magic that help keep the
Mhm.
kids safe, and then the forest friends, Sammy and her forest friends, who help teach the kids how to be safe all day long,
Mhm.
and also how to learn these kind of new safety practices that
Nice.
sometimes we have to do. And then we build in choice, and that is one of the biggest things. So we model, and in fact, we build them to be the subject matter experts. So when I come into the classroom, so a lot of times they'll recognize Sammy and they'll be like, "Oh my gosh, Sammy, you all know Sammy? Yeah, what's Sammy really good at?
Right.
Lockdown, lock slides, out of sight. Oh my gosh, you all are so good at this."
Wow.
And walk me and Sammy through it. And then we model it for them. And
Mhm.
then eventually we invite them and we let them know that they don't have to practice it.
Right.
So it's all these different ways of normalizing, externalizing, building subject matter expertise,
Mhm.
empowering the kids, and
Mhm.
wrapping it in this concept that you already practice being safe all day long. And this is just another new thing that you're going to practice.
Absolutely. Now, you said you created the book to help you, make it, make it easier for you to teach them and give them more options. I imagine the doll, that physical interaction with the doll helps reinforce it, viscerally, I imagine.
Yeah, for them, yeah, it definitely makes Sammy more real.
Mhm.
I try to not. It's kind of like when you teach kids that Santa's real, right?
Right. Right. Right.
Like, I don't want to lie, but we just kind of like, yeah, this is Sammy's special form,
Right.
and it does make it much more real that Sammy is there, right?
Okay. Now,
She's
would you say, because it helped you with your presentations, would you say that this also helps parents at home? Like if they were to use this as a tool, to help teach this lesson? Like, have you
absolutely.
experienced that?
Yeah, so Sammy, right now that's one of two Sammys that exists. So there's no parents that have Sammys at home. But the story actually has 4 pages in it at the very beginning, for specifically geared to parents and caring adults about how do you have these conversations at
Okay.
home. Because what we find is that kids hear more and they know more than we actually think, like they catch on to stuff like media, they hear stuff at school. And so what we're finding is that these conversations aren't happening at home, understandably, because
Mhm.
parents and caring adults are afraid of opening that Pandora's box and they don't know
Okay.
how to answer it. And
Right.
so what we want is to lift that veil of secrecy and silence, and to support adults to have these conversations,
Okay.
so that the kids can be empowered.
That's excellent. That's so great. Now, you mentioned earlier, you were talking about how you remember from your childhood stop, drop, and roll for fires. I noticed that in your book, Sammy the Sasquatch, Welcome to Crittertopia, you have lockdown, locks, lights, out of sight, repeated multiple times, and you have it in color. I imagine that was done on purpose. When you're reading that to the kids, is that something that you repeat to them? And if so, why? Why do you do that?
Yeah, we do repeat it.
Like, do the
Humans
kids
learn
say it? I
well.
mean, like, that's what I meant to say. Do the kids
Yes.
repeat it to you? Okay.
They do, yeah, and we do have them repeat it multiple times when we're in the classroom,
Mhm.
and if, we're reading the book with them, we do have them say it with us. It helps to just ingrain that message, and
Mhm.
humans learn really well in sets of 3, right? That's usually why our phone numbers are
Ah,
sets of 3.
okay.
That's why, stop, drop, and roll is a set of 3, and so the lock, lights, out of sight. specifically.
Ah,
And that's what a lot of schools use. It's very common language.
mhm.
And so it was an easy thing for us to go with.
Nice. That's very clever. Now, I noticed that there are few other children's books published on lockdowns, but I only noticed one in my library because after I heard about you, I was looking. I was like, do we have any books on lockdowns? And it turns out we only had one in 22 library branches. Here we go. The one that I found, it was called "This Is Not a Drill" by K.A. Holt. I don't know if you've ever heard of it, but apparently it's geared towards middle school kids. Why is Sammy the Sasquatch Welcome to Crittertopia different from other children's books on lockdowns?
Yeah. So I have to say I haven't read that specific one. I though did look into it after you mentioned it to me. So I can't speak to having read it, though looking through the summary of it, it does appear to be a bit more kind of real situation based
Hmm.
and maybe
Hmm.
have a little bit potential for fear because of the situation that the student's facing.
I see.
Uh, so the other books that, and I don't want to put down anybody else's book, especially one that I haven't read.
Right, right. I'm just noticing the differences. I mean, one, yours is geared towards a younger audience, and maybe they felt they had to be more serious for middle schoolers, kind of thing. But I
Potentially.
know you have a different approach for yours.
So, and there are other children's books, illustrated children's books on lockdown. There's 3 that I know of.
Hmm.
The challenge when I read those is that they were not trauma informed. And so I don't want to take anything to a classroom or into any space really that isn't trauma informed. And
Hmm.
so that was why I developed Sammy. What we teach, we actually have a model where we go in and teach Sammy and friends the trauma informed approach to emergency drills,
Hmm.
because it's not just lockdowns you can teach in a trauma informed way, it's any emergency drill.
Right.
So we train coaches in school systems to go and do this. Uh, and and within that, it was just super important to us that they learned the theory behind it,
Hmm.
because while Sammy the Sasquatch and any other stories that we publish in the Sammy and Friends series are geared towards 4 to 8 year olds, that was number one, because it was a big area that was lacking resources when it comes to
Hmm.
teaching emergency drills in trauma informed ways. But in addition to that, because we teach the principles of how to do it, you can apply those principles to any age. And so we will go in as Sammy and Friends and have conversations with middle schoolers and high schoolers, but we
Oh,
don't use the Sammy doll. We don't use the
okay.
story, but we
Right.
still apply the trauma informed approach. And
Nice.
that's what really matters.
Okay, so let me ask you. So, for any parents or any caring adults that might be watching this, and you indicated earlier that sometimes they just either they're nervous or they simply just don't know how to bring up that kind of conversation. What kind of advice would you offer them?
So, first off, remember that lockdown is a function. Lockdown
Hmm.
is not about active shooter. And so we always want to direct back to the fact that this is a practice that you can do, just like looking both ways before you cross the road, to keep
Right.
yourself safe, regardless of what's going on in the world around you. So we want to have that strengths-based approach, not focusing on any specific threat or hazard. So wrapping the conversation in general safety practices is
Hmm.
super important. Helping the kids understand, we talk about the critter elders in the book and how they have special magic, and they do things within Crittertopia that help keep everybody safe,
Right.
just like adults in our world are constantly practicing to keep us safe, even if the kids might not be aware of the
Hmm.
safety practices that adults are doing. So it's helping them to understand the world around them. And then making sure, understanding that the kids are going to co-regulate with you. So the emotions that you express, the energy that you bring to the conversation, that's going to help the kids understand, like they're going to look to you. Should I be afraid right now? Is this a
Right.
weird thing that
Right. Right.
my adult, my parent is talking about?
Yes.
And
Kind of like
so
when babies fall and everything, they look at you real quick and you're like safe, like you okay? Like as soon as the parents goes, oh my god, and then the kid suddenly starts crying. Oh, I should be traumatized right now. But yes, that's a very important distinction. I love that.
so my nephew, he's 8 months old. I was sitting on the ground and there was a giant foam pad and a nice
Hmm.
pad carpet, and he might have rolled off my lap the other day and bonked his little head. And he looked at me and I picked him up and I was like, "What an adventure! Did you do a somersault?"
Right,
And
right,
he's
right.
like, "Yeah, I'm good. I'm good." Right. So
Oh,
he
do it
looked at me
again.
and I was like, "Oh, we're gonna be fine. We're gonna be fine, dude.
Right,
You got
right,
this."
right.
And so they're going to look to you, right?
Yes.
Now, they are also going to have their own feelings within that. And so if you
Mhm.
see within them or they express in some way what I would call a challenging emotion, not a negative emotion, because no emotions are negative or
Okay.
bad, a challenging emotion like fear or anxiety, recognize and honor that, because What's often happening is they are sitting in secrecy and silence, and it's the feeling alone
Hmm.
that makes it so challenging. And so
Right.
when we witness that with them and normalize it, oh my gosh, I see you right now. It is kind of, it makes me nervous sometimes when I learn new things. That's okay. That's
Mhm.
okay. Um, when you mirror that for them, oftentimes it relieves a lot of that anxiety. And then you navigate back to, you are so good at keeping yourself safe. You do all these things all day long. And also, I want parents and caring adults to understand that there is research on lockdown drills,
Mhm.
on the function, excuse me, of lockdown. It keeps kids safe. It keeps adults safe.
Right.
If you follow the steps and you do it properly, you don't only use lockdown in the event of active shooter, but that is often what people think of. And it is the function you would use in response to an active threat inside the campus.
Right.
There's only been 3 instances where people behind a locked door in an active shooter incident in classroom settings have lost their lives.
Wow.
In none of those incidents was it because the attacker breached the lock on the door.
Oh.
So, and there's evidence you can read. Dr. Jacqueline Schildkraut of the SUNY Rockefeller Institute of Government has amazing research on it, and she has best practices that they've researched, and we have all the best practices and then some in our Sammy and Friends approach.
Hmm.
But there's research on this, and so we know that lockdown works. We know it can keep people safe. We wish that there were never active threats on schools. It would be amazing,
Right.
right? If
Yeah.
we never had to do this.
Hmm.
But again, lockdown is a function not just in response to an active threat. And so,
Right.
regardless of what's going on, we want to make sure that kids and adults know how to keep themselves safe.
Absolutely. You mentioned earlier that when an emergency like that happens, kids look to adults. Are that what kinds of? I know that kids are naturally inquisitive. What kind of questions do you have the kids normally asked you about being prepared for emergencies?
Yeah. So when we're in the classroom, oftentimes, actually, we field the questions beforehand. So we have the teachers read the story a week before we arrive, and they get questions from the kiddos and they send those on to us.
Hmm.
Uh, a lot of times the questions center around like, what are we going to do? So they want to know the steps. They heard lock sites out of sight, but they want to know, what are we going to do when you visit?
Right.
Um, and so they want to know what they're going to be kind of asked to participate in or invited in. They actually have a lot of questions about Crittertopia, oddly enough, that I have to kind of make up answers to on the fly. Like,
Right.
what do Crittertopians eat? Um,
Right. Right. Right.
what are their tables like? I'm like, oh my gosh, is one of your parents a furniture maker? Like,
Well, for the
um,
most part, they are getting it. They're getting the story. It sounds like they are
they're
getting the
getting the
lesson, but they
story.
want. It looks like they want to dive in a little bit deeper into that world a little bit.
They do. They also do ask questions, about what if, someone does make it into the school. And what we always go back to is, remember, there are all of these ways that adults are practicing to keep you safe. And we
Mhm.
always talk about teacher. Teacher knows who's supposed to be in school. And teacher's going to notice when there's someone in school that is not supposed to be here. And
Right.
teacher is going to do everything to keep you safe. But you know what? It's super unlikely that anybody who's not supposed to be in your school is ever going to be here. And
Right.
it's super unlikely that even if they did, that they're going to even know that you're here if you're doing a lockdown. So we always drive it back to, it's super unlikely. And also we talk about the helpers. In fact, when we go into classrooms,
Mhm.
might be a little controversial for some places, but we take law enforcement with us. And we tell
Okay.
the kids before we come, right? They're informed that a law
Mhm.
enforcement
Mhm.
officer is going to come with Sammy and her friends. So
Right.
they're
Right.
prepared for that in case they have any stress activation associated with people in uniforms.
Right.
And we talk about the helpers. Oh my goodness. Did you know the helpers are always around? And the helpers are going to be here so fast.
And that's one thing I loved about your book, how you presented all the elders and all the helpers as like these wise people, magical people, they're there to help the kids. And I think that was a wonderful way to present them, because, like you said, there might be some negative associations to people in uniform for whatever reason. I have no idea. I don't want to guess what every kid is feeling and thinking. But yeah, that's a wonderful way to present them, I think. So if kids or any parents that might be watching this want to know more about Sammy the Sasquatch, welcome to Crittertopia. How can they learn more about you, the services you offer, and where can they go?
Yeah, they can go to sammyandfriends.com. They can connect with us there. We have a phone number and email address listed. And Sammy the Sasquatch, Welcome to Crittertopia is actually available for pre-order right now,
Oh.
both on Amazon and on Barnes and Noble. but you can get it through your local bookstore. It's published through Ingram Spark. And I always love if you can support your local bookstore. So you can just walk in and ask to pre-order it through them as well.
That's excellent. Okay, well, wonderful. Claire, it was such a pleasure meeting you. Thank you for so much for sharing your story with us and your experience and for giving advice to any parents that might be watching. If you ever want to come back, give me a call or send me an email.
Yeah. Thank you so much for having me. Happy to
Yeah,
come back
thank you
anytime.
so much. All right, take care.
Thanks, you too.
Bye-bye.